My Lords, I thank the noble Lord Alton very much for securing this debate and for his extremely powerful words to start it. I also thank all other noble lords for their insightful contributions. A surge in violent conflict since 2010 has prompted historically high levels of mass and forced displacement. As Noble Lord Alton said in his opening remarks, the UN Refugee Agency estimates that the number of forcibly displaced people rose to a record-breaking 82 million during the course of 2020. That's more than 1% of the world's population, or it's 1 in every 95 people driven from their homes. Some by conflicts and natural disasters, others by hunger, climate change, poverty, or persecution. In 2010, that figure was 1 in every 159 people, so there's little wonder that the international humanitarian system is under strain. Crises are also becoming increasingly protracted, with around 3/4 of all refugees displaced for more than 5 years, and in some cases, as Noble Lord Alton again pointed out, in some cases much longer than that. The pandemic has made things worse. COVID has thrived in the cramped conditions that many displaced people endure, and it's prevented them from being able to return home. So it's clear that the international community has an immense and growing task on its hand to support those driven from their homes. And I'm going to set out some of the actions that the UK government has taken to address the crisis, and I'm going to outline our work to tackle its root causes as well. So the UK's got a strong track record of helping those who need our protection and our assistance, as well as the host communities that give them sanctuary. Despite the seismic impact of the pandemic on the UK economy, the government remains one of the largest donors in the world. Indeed, we spent more than £10 billion on overseas development assistance last year, making us the third largest donor in the G7. And in answer to comments by a number of noble lords, not least Noble Lord Hannay, Noble Lord Dobbs, Lord Purvis, and the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, Parliament has endorsed a clear pathway to return to 0.7%, which on current projections will be by 24-25. And I don't think it's out of place to say that there is a strong feeling that as soon as those conditions are met, we must immediately return to 0.7. Displaced people are, of course, a huge priority for our overseas aid and for the international development community. Humanitarian assistance is one of the Foreign Secretary's top priorities for the FCDO. Our work to support displaced people and host countries and to champion international humanitarian law is central to our efforts to build a global network of liberty. We've led the way in forging innovative solutions to refugee crises, championing a longer-term approach and helping shape the global compact on refugees, including with our pioneering responses in Jordan and Ethiopia. The UK is one of the largest donors to the agencies working on the front line. We provided £29 million in core funding last year to the UN Refugee Agency, £25 million to the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, £37 million to the World Food Programme, and this helped agencies with rapid responses, staff training and accountability. And our support goes far beyond funding. We play a central and influential governance role via these agencies' executive committees and through our UN reform agenda. And we also use our global network to carry out humanitarian diplomacy and support people directly through our own programs. In response to the increasingly drawn-out nature of crises and the years of strain that they put on host communities, we've worked with international partners on innovative longer-term solutions. And our focus is on a holistic approach, restoring dignity and offering refugees a viable future while supporting their hosts. And this approach has won, as Noble Lord Harries and Noble Lord Griffiths both said, this has won global acceptance through the internationally agreed Global Compact on Refugees. And to reassure them both, the UK remains absolutely committed to it. The Compact aims to help refugees stay near their homes and to support host communities by investing in education, in job creation and in economic growth. And our commitment to the Global Compact is reflected in our country programmes, including our contribution of more than £320 million to the Rohingyas in Bangladesh since the crisis began 4 years ago, which has provided life-saving food, healthcare and sanitation for refugees. It's also assisted vulnerable neighbouring countries as well. The conflict in Syria, which a number of noble lords have raised, has been one of the largest crises in terms of displacement in history. In response to this, we've provided more than £2 billion of support to 5.5 million refugees and their host communities since 2012. And our support in Syria in response to the Noble Lord Purvis, of course, has direct impacts and benefits for Yazidi communities who have perhaps been on the receiving end of more abuse and more horrific abuse than almost anyone else. I'm going to have to get back to him and ask the relevant minister to respond on his question around the Sinjar agreement. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. In northern Iraq, we continue to work with humanitarian agencies and Iraq's government to ensure that displaced persons can return home in a safe, dignified and voluntary manner. Meanwhile, in Yemen, the UK has contributed over £1 billion of humanitarian assistance since the start of the conflict, and this supports the most vulnerable groups, including those who have had to flee their homes. And in Ethiopia, and I note the comments by Lord Collins, who remarked on the rapidity with which things have deteriorated in that country, and as an example of how things can unravel incredibly quickly in unexpected parts of the world. In Ethiopia, we provided more than £76 million of humanitarian aid since the start of the conflict in Tigray, and this includes food and water for the most vulnerable communities across northern Ethiopia, and will also deliver health, mental health, and psychosocial support to around 40,000 displaced persons. And just very briefly in response to Noble Lord Collins, I can't obviously go into details around the international development strategy, but I can tell him that our strategy will reaffirm very clearly our commitment to Africa, and I'm sure we'll be discussing, perhaps debating the issue in due course. The worsening humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is also, of course, hugely concerning, and I note the comments by Noble Baroness Smith. We're doubling our humanitarian and development assistance this financial year to £286 million, and that's providing life-saving food and emergency health services, shelter, water, and hygiene services. The increase has also boosted our support to the UN's regional response and to the neighbouring countries who are hosting many of those refugees. Now, resettlement to stable countries is clearly a hugely important strand of the global compact, and in the UK since 2015 we've resettled more than 25,000 men, women and children seeking refuge from persecution. We've issued more than 39,000 visas under the refugee family reunion rules, around half to children. And in response to the Noble Baroness Smith and Noble Lord Alton, apologies, and a number of other noble lords, the government's Afghan citizens resettlement scheme will provide up to 20,000 vulnerable people with a safe and legal route to resettle in the UK. And I think that puts it at the most generous such scheme in this country's history. And I think it is worth reiterating that in the space of just 2 weeks, Operation Pitting, I hope I've got that right, it was Operation Pitting, brought 15,000 people to safety in the UK, working in incredibly difficult circumstances, but really moving a very large number of people in a record time to positions of safety, and working with the UNCHR to design and open up that scheme so that it is a more appropriate scheme for the ever-changing circumstances, and we're going to be able to provide more details on that very soon. The scheme that I described earlier will also prioritise those who've assisted UK efforts in Afghanistan and stood up for our values such as democracy, women's rights, freedom of speech and the rule of law. It'll focus on the most vulnerable people, such as women and girls, and members of minority groups. And under Operation Warm Welcome, we're helping Afghans arriving in the UK to rebuild their lives, to find work, to pursue education, and to integrate within their new local communities. And since 2015, the UK has assisted more people through resettlement schemes than any other country in Europe. Now, children, of course, need to be at the heart of our work. It's a point that's been made in a number of speeches today. They make up 42% of all displaced people, and we know that children in fragile and conflict-affected countries are more than twice as likely to miss out on school compared with their counterparts in peaceful nations. And if these children are to have any hope and the chance of a fulfilling and prosperous future, it's essential that we support them to continue that education. And that's why in Nigeria, and I say this partly in response to the comments of Noble Baroness Baroness Cox. In Nigeria, for example, our humanitarian programs have enabled more than 200,000 conflict-affected children to access education, and with more than 2 million internally displaced people in Nigeria, our £425 million humanitarian program is also supporting 1.5 million people with food assistance and providing access to toilets and clean water. More broadly, the UK is also a founding member and the largest donor to Education Cannot Wait, the Global Fund for Education in Emergencies. We've committed £90 million to the programme from 2019 to 2023. And with our support, the programme's helped more than 4.5 million children continue their education over the past 3 years through periods of crisis and conflict. Besides helping those in immediate need, it is, of course, as this very debate has emphasised in almost every speech, particularly comments by the Right Reverend, the Prelate, the Bishop of Leeds, it is crucial that we address the root causes of displacement. That's absolutely central to our approach, and it's not only central to our approach, it's directly in our own interest as well as being the right thing to do. Addressing the triggers from conflict to climate change, from poverty to abuse of human rights, is a key strand of our integrated review, and it sets out our plans to address these challenges over the next 10 years. We will use all the political, security, development and trade levers we have to reduce tensions, to end conflicts, build stability, protect freedoms and spread opportunity and prosperity across the globe. The multilateral system is central to that approach, but we will not be constrained by its limitations. And just in response to the Noble Baroness Bennett, who helpfully provided the environmental context, which is a looming context for and growing context for so many of the movements that have been described today. And she talked about the need to clear up our supply chain. She talked about commodities causing deforestation, contributing further to climate change and displacement. And cleaning up our supply chains is a key commitment that we've made. We're at the early stages of it. Much of what was discussed and agreed at COP involved the need to break the link between commodities and deforestation and put deforestation at the heart of our global, or stopping deforestation at the heart of our global response to climate change. And I commend her also for her campaign, which she didn't mention today, but nevertheless her campaign for recognition of ecocide, which I think has a direct bearing and certainly will have an even bigger bearing on the issues that we're discussing today as the years go by. Conflicts will continue to be the main driver of displacement, and we will do all we can to prevent, manage and resolve them. The UK has contributed over £160 million to the UN Peacebuilding Fund since its inception, and in May last year we announced a further £10 million for this financial year. We continue to work with UN agencies, with funds and programmes, as well as international financial institutions and important regional bodies like the African Union. And this will help ensure effective and sustainable approaches to reducing conflict in fragile states. And for lasting peace, we know that women must have a seat at the table. And it was a point made very powerfully in the speech by Noble Baroness Greengross. We know that when women participate in peace processes, there is a 35% increase in the probability of a peace agreement lasting for at least 15 years, and that's why the UK government is a leading proponent of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And to reduce forced displacement, we will also continue to stand up for human rights and international humanitarian law and use our influence to hold to account those who violate them. And as part of our efforts to defend human rights, we introduced, as Noble Lords will know, a new system of Magnitsky Sanctions in July 2020 to target human rights violators and abusers around the world. And we've used the global human rights sanctions regime to designate nearly 80 individuals and entities involved in some of the most notorious human rights violations in recent years. And this includes government officials and bodies in Belarus, in Myanmar, in China, in Russia and North Korea. And the UK also works with partners at the UN to target human rights violations and abuses. For example, we implement UN sanctions against individuals involved in human trafficking and human rights abuses against migrants in Libya. Sexual violence is another recurrent cause of displacement, and since the launch of our groundbreaking Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative in 2012, successive UK governments have transformed the way that the international community deals with those crimes. We've sent over 80 deployments of UK experts to affected countries. We've trained more than 17,000 police and military personnel on sexual violence issues, and we've committed over £50 million to support numerous projects around the world. In November, the Foreign Secretary launched a major new global campaign to stop sexual violence against women and girls in conflict around the world. She's bringing together partners to condemn rape and sexual violence in conflict as a red line. And the UK will be hosting a global conference this year in which we hope to unite the world in action. Now, climate change and extreme weather events. Yeah.
Elements within Africa. All of those pernicious elements, as he rightly said, have been present and continue to be present in Nigeria. The government has cut its support from the £250 million, which he said has been the case. But what he didn't say is it's going down to just £60 million in 2023. Has an objective developmental system of assessment been carried out to inform that cut, given the fact that this pressure is ongoing? Or are these simply arbitrary cuts?
The Noble Lord made the point, and he made a point well in his speech, that there have been cuts across the board as a consequence of the move from 0.7 to 0.5. Those have involved lots of difficult decisions. It's not something that I think most people welcomed. We have a pathway that will return us to 0.7, hopefully in the next couple of years. As I said to Noble Lord Collins, when we publish our development strategy, we will be reaffirming the importance of, the centrality of the continent, Africa, in our vision and our plans. And I very much hope that the Noble Lord will be reassured by the report when it is published, but I can't go into details at this point. Turning to climate change, because it's been raised rightly by a number of Noble Lords today, all the science tells us that climate change and environmental destruction are likely to become a bigger and bigger reason for the increasing movement of people in the coming years. And the point was made well by the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Leeds, Noble Lord Dobbs, Lumba, and Noble Baroness Kennedy all made very similar points. And the UK has played a leading role in the global response to climate change. COP26 made unexpected and really important progress on adaptation and climate finance, which are obviously essential to managing climate displacement. And I think that the work we did in the run-up to COP26 and the work we will be doing this year as COP presidents, which will be no less intense than the work that was done last year, I think are a good example, a really positive example of internationalization, internationalism, and I think in many ways embody what many of us mean by global Britain. We've committed domestically to doubling our international climate finance to $11.6 billion. Over the next 5 years. We'll be putting a significant chunk of that into helping to restore and protect nature as a serious and central contribution to tackling climate change. But above all, that $11.6 billion will be spent in a way that supports vulnerable countries to make themselves more resilient to climate change. And in doing so, we hope to ease future migration pressures. My lords, the tragic truth is that forced displacement is on a biblical scale today. And I really, actually before I make that point, I did want to comment without answer necessarily the speech, the very powerful speech made by Noble Lord Hayward, who issued a number of important questions to the, I believe, CEO of Coca-Cola, Mr. Quincy, and I would simply encourage Mr. Quincy, if he's paying attention to this debate, to answer those questions. I think it's very important that he does. But as I said, the forced displacement is on a record scale today, and all the signs suggest that that's going to continue, that the trend is upwards. And in the face of this terrible human suffering, I'm proud that the UK has a strong record of helping those who need our protection. I'd like to pay tribute to the generosity of all host nations and communities who welcome those driven from their homes, and to the tireless work of those who support them in the most difficult circumstances. The international community can only address need on this scale through a holistic approach, with countless painstaking political, diplomatic, military and humanitarian interventions. The UK government's committed to doing all we can, harnessing our political clout, our diplomatic expertise, our military know-how and our humanitarian reach to support the displaced and to give them hope of a viable future. I thank noble lords for their comments today.
My lords, I was particularly pleased when I saw that the noble Lord Goldsmith of Richmond had been asked to reply to the debate in your lordship's house today. The noble lord is well known for painting on a big picture scale, and undoubtedly he will have heard from all the speeches throughout today's debate that this is a canvas which gives him enormous scope to use the position which he is now in and the ability which he clearly has, and also the combination of idealism and pragmatism which he brings together. There is nothing wrong in having good altruistic motives and nothing wrong with combining them with self-interest. And that has been a theme which we've heard throughout the debate in your lordship's house today. It's been a debate that's been passionate, knowledgeable, rich, reasoned and urgent. We've heard a lot about the push factors in comparison with the debate yesterday which focused on pull factors. We've heard about the role of global corporations, the displacement of widows, children, women, the consequences of the breakdown of the rule of law and international institutions, the consequences of dehumanizing and stigmatizing refugees, the need for wise statecraft and diplomacy in combating conflict, the central role of our development programme, Magnitsky Sanctions, and individual and collective actions, including boycotts. Many specific places, many specific ideas have been mentioned, and I was struck that we were encouraged not to just think about percentages, but individual people. And we were reminded that it comes down to 1 in 95 people in the world who are displaced. We've heard a lot about systems failure, not least the failures in the Security Council and its role in creating insecurity. And we've heard about leadership and the need for more international resolve, not less. My lords, it's been a very good debate. What we do as we go away from your lordship's chamber today about it is what will really count.
Yeah.